Hello everybody, welcome back to my little corner of the internet where I will talk about stories of my life, my work both as a comic book author and a translator, my cats Hey Hey and Serengeti, and the occasional movie, book or TV series review and recommendation, as well as some rants if the feeling hits. And unfortunately, it's time for a rant again, because this thing keeps happening. And it seems that there are people who just can't accept that, hey, there are other people in the world who are not the same skin color as they are, and that those people deserve the exact same respect and roles as everybody else. Calm down, Adalisa, calm down. Yes, I've talked about diversity before in terms of neurodivergence, gender, and sexual preferences, but it's time to tackle the big one, or at least the most visible one: race. Because The Little Mermaid, Peter Pan, and of all things, Ant-Man Quantumania have resuscitated this old debate, so, well, let's talk about how diversity is never, ever forced. If I have to be completely honest with you, I don't remember when this debate started happening or when I started noticing it. Obviously, it's easy to track it back to the origin of the internet, because I remember people being very, very angry that Michael Clark Duncan was cast as Kingpin for the Daredevil movie when, come on, he was the only good thing in that particular mess. But I will not be surprised to learn that it's older than the internet. I mean, I bet there were people mad that Billy D. Williams was Harvey Dent in the 1989 movie, even if his role was barely a cameo and nothing like Two-Face. In fact, it wasn't until Batman Forever in 1995 when we would see the emblematic villain, and by then Williams had been recast as Tommy Lee Jones as the new Dent, who was white and acted more like the Joker than Two-Face, but again, Batman Forever had more problems than just the casting. But regardless of when the complaints started, the truth is that they have become cyclical to an absurd degree. Practically no cast can be announced without someone denouncing the presence of minorities as some sort of forced agenda from the woke left. Whatever they mean by that, since woke originally meant aware of social injustice, which is not a bad thing to be. Anyway, the hate becomes even worse if, for some reason, said minorities are present in a role that was originated by a white actor or was presented as white in the original source material, or was mistaken as white by not-so-bright readers who just default to white wherever they can. Part of this is, of course, nostalgia. Many of the protesters were children back in the day where cartoons had one token black member in any given group, and if we were lucky, one token woman, who was usually a redhead because for some reason they were the happy medium between the dumb blonde, the nerdy brunette, and the black-haired femme fatale. This was in the 80s, mind you, where one of the most diverse cartoons I could find in my memories was Dungeons and Dragons, because it just happened to have two girls in the group, and one of them, Diana, was black. I am almost sure that She-Ra had a black ally among the rebels in the original series, but if I am right and it's not Mandela effect, said black ally only appeared in one episode to sell a toy and then disappeared into the ether. By the 90s, things had gotten a teensy bit better when we got into the token teams. Think Captain Planet, when we had, of course, our black kid from Africa. Where in Africa? Who cares? He's black, he's from Africa. What more do you want from the writers? The Asian kid from Asia. No, seriously. We never get more specific than that with them. Matty is worse as he's Matty. They never specifically says that he's Latin American or Indian, and isn't that a hood? Oh, and again, two girls. Don't get me wrong. For its time, Captain Planet was incredibly progressive, both with the addition of characters not born in the USA as main characters, Gaia as a black woman, the whole protect the planet message, even if a bit ham-fisted at times, and some storylines that you will not find in a modern cartoon, like when they had to tackle the AIDS pandemic. But just because it was progressive in the 90s, it doesn't mean that it was perfect, not that it was the best minority representation that we should expect and want. What I am getting here is that media in the 80s and the 90s was incredibly white. Comics too, by the way. because even if there were black superheroes with their own titles, like Luke Cage and Black Panther, or popular in other titles like Storm and Jon Stewart, the majority of the superheroes, their friends and family, white. And if black heroes were rare, Latin American heroes or Asian heroes that were not a horrible stereotype were even less common. The less we talk about Apache Chief and El Dorado from Super Friends, the better. This is, of course, because in those decades and the decades before, the majority of established and published media was made by white people. And there were a lot of very racist laws in the United States that made the possibility of a black main actor or a black superhero be quite hard. In fact, since we are going to talk about T'Challa, he was created as part of a protest by Stan Lee and Marvel against said laws. And they got letter of people protesting him because how could a black man be able to beat the Fantastic Four? I honestly wish I was kidding. But no, those letters exist and were published by Marvel with very good snarky responses by the man himself because, come on, black people exist and they deserve heroes. So why don't we have many legacy heroes that are black or brown? Well, because back then no one thought that black or brown people could be heroes. It took the work of a lot of people for that to start to change, little by little. And although things have gotten a bit better, I mean, now everyone can get up on a stage, even if there are a few roles for them, and about 90% of the world agrees that blackface and brownface portrayals are plain racist and wrong, things still are not good enough. Among the people who helped bring this change, Mexican actor Ricardo Montalban. Better known as Khan for Star Trek fans, Mr. Rorke for those who remember Fantasy Island, and Armando Gutierrez for the three people beside me who are still waiting for a Freakazoid return, Ricardo Montalban was also an avid activist for the right of minority actors, and in fact, very early in his career, he started refusing stereotypical Latino roles like bandidos, evil henchmen, servants, and homeless men. Back then, we didn't have Narcos yet, but he probably would not have wanted a role in Narcos either. One of the main things that he championed, and other actors both Latin American and black have championed it before and since, is that minorities deserve better roles, instead of always being written as a second afterthought. That everyone had the right to audition for every role, and that they should get the chance to show their talent if they were the best for said role. No. I can hear some of you, in particular those who insist that the problem with changing character races is that it doesn't respect the original or how it was originally created. Not that there is a problem with people of color existing, but they only complain when it's a person of color. Saying that, yes, of course, that means that also the white actor can portray a character of color and no one should complain. Problem is, this only would be true if it wasn't for the long history of discrimination against actors of color by precisely whitewashing characters, or worse, putting a white actor in black, brown, or yellow face. I want you guys to understand that it wasn't until the 30s when Hollywood stopped using blackface constantly in order to avoid hiring actors of color. And I said constantly because we still have cases of blackface in sitcoms and movies, usually under the excuse of satire, but more often than not just because. And once they started accepting that there were black actors, they were incredibly limited in the roles that they could play, usually poor servants, thugs, or of course victims of segregation, until a white savior came and helped them. Not only that, they were completely stereotyped as servants, naive to the point of stupidity, or trying to pass as white, or yes, the mammy, the asexual mother figure. And finally, of course, the hypersexualized figures. Not much to actually represent people, much less people of color and their experiences. This, of course, brought a lot of criticism against the actors, rather than against the people who wrote those roles. Does this sound stupid? I know for me it does. For example, the leader of the National Association of Advanced of Colored People, the NAACP, Walter Francis White, looked down on Hattie McDaniel, who was the first African American to win an Oscar for supporting actress back in 1940, as her role in the winning Oscar movie Gone with the Wind, as many others she played, were the mommy, the mentioned black asexual lady who was there just to help raise the kid of rich white families. But the problem was that there were no other roles for Hattie or other actresses back then, and even with an Oscar in her shelf, McDaniels kept suffering from discrimination that didn't allow her to audition for any other roles. This tendency of casting black people as servants hasn't changed. Even if now we have black directors who try hard to cast only people of color in their movies, and of course are accused of reverse racism, while an all-white cast is just what audiences want, there is still the issue of how in 2011, one of the most famous films with a black lead was The Help, which is about how a white woman finds her inspiration and decides to fight racism because she's inspired by two black mates she knows. This makes the black mates magical Negroes, which is another trope that, oh my god, we really have to put on a shelf and forget it existed. It was not the only black-themed movie of that year, but it was the only one that was nominated for an Academy Award, winning Best Supporting Actress. In 2014, things didn't get better this time because the most famous movie with black leads was 12 Years a Slave. Because apparently those are the stories about black people that Hollywood can or wants to tell. Servants, slaves fighting for their freedom, oh, and of course, young men saved from a life of crime by white people. Anyone remembers The Blind Side, which completely ignored the real story of Michael Other to give all the props to the white woman who adopted him? Comics were not much better at first, given that one of our first non-minstrel looking characters was Lothar in Mandrake from 1934, but that it took 30 years or so for him to stop being dressed in animal skins and learn proper English. Then there was a time in 1956 where the Comic Code Authority tried to censor a short story in Incredible Science called Judgment Day, a reprint from an older issue, because the main character was revealed to be black in the very last panel. He was an astronaut finding a planet populated by robots who had divided themselves into orange and blue models, exactly identical to each other, but in which one had more rights than the other, just for their color. The story was not subtle at all. ISIS editor-in-chief Al Feldstein even went up to threat the judge who wanted to censor the story with a lawsuit because the whole point was that he was black. In the big two, however, we got some early secondary characters to appear, even if the first one, Whitewash, looked like a white kid in blackface way back in the 40s Young Allies, which included some great characters that have managed to survive more or less until today, like Bill Foster, who then became Goliath II or Black Goliath, and was mercilessly killed in Civil War because reasons. But it wasn't until 1966 when Marvel finally introduced a black superhero, the now really famous Black Panther. He was followed by the Falcon and later Black Racer on DC, who in turn was followed by Black Green Lantern John Stewart, all of them in the 70s, which is also the decade when Luke Cage became the first black superhero to debut in his own title. I am not going to count how many white heroes were there existing at that point. A little later, in 1975, Storm made her appearance in All New Uncanny X-Men and became the first major African black female character in any Marvel title. This was 2 years after DC had introduced Nubia, Wonder Woman's fraternal twin sister who happened to be black. But even if Nubia was first, we can't deny that Aurora Munro, Storm, is a lot more popular and known by the general public. It is also important to know that all of these heroes came out at the exact same time that blaxploitation was popular in movies. Not only that up until 1957, due to the laws of segregations, black artists couldn't work at the big two. So yeah, that is another one of the reasons why I didn't see much good black representations before then. And after that, well, we got Milestone Media in 1993, which introduced a lot of characters of color as it was founded by Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan, Michael Davis, and Derek T. Dingle because they felt that the big two severely underrepresented or misrepresented minorities in general and wanted to fix this. They were active, publishing under DC Comics but not under their control until 1997. Since then, the characters were completely merged into the main DC universe and kinda disappeared into the background until Reginald Holding made a revival of Milestone, named Milestone Returns, which is still published but now has relegated all the characters back to their own separate universe called Our Team. You know, separate but equal, and that doesn't sound any better now as it was then. And while new characters are created for comics all the time, the majority of them are still white because that's still the status quo. Which brings us to the new problem when said IPs are adapted to other medias. So, nowadays, some people get up in arms about blackwashing characters such as Mary Jane, Jimmy Olsen, Ariel, Tinkerbell, Jimmy Storm, and the Blue Fairy, among others. But those are the exact same people who don't blink an eye to whitewashing characters because, well, insert any excuse here. When some people, including me, complained that Scarlett Johansson was a terrible choice for Major Kusanagi in Ghost in the Shell, the excuse they gave was that because Major Kusanagi is a cyborg, she doesn't have to look Japanese. Never mind that she's drawn exactly the way Masamune Shirow draws Japanese women, and that the mangaka usually draws white characters differently from their Japanese characters. When Johnny Depp was cast as Toro in The Lone Ranger and managed to bring down the whole affair with his cartoonish portrayal, the excuse was that he was 1/8 Native American from his grandmother's side, never mind actually giving a tribe. I have heard like 50 different ones regarding those who defend him. And that was good enough even if he had never mentioned that little bit of heritage before or since. When the very real Asian American MIT students who became card-counting wizards were portrayed by white actors in 21, oh, it's because the movie needed big names to be promoted. And so on and on and on and on. My personal most hated one? When Benedict Cumberbatch was cast as Khan, people actually said that it was okay because the original was also a white actor. Never mind, the original was Ricardo Montalban, who was most definitely not a white actor. So whitewashing is a thing, and it's very most accepted by the majority because they are good actors, why shouldn't they play those parts? Or as Scarlett Johansson very badly said, if I want to play a tree, I should be able to play a tree, when criticized for being cast as a trans person. Well, the thing is that the exact same thing goes for black actors. If they were the best in the audition, why shouldn't they play those parts, even if for decades that role was limited to white actors for many reasons, including the racism of the era? There is absolutely nothing in the roles of Mary Jane, Jimmy Olsen, or Johnny Storm that demand them to be white. I am not going to go into the whole red-headed thing because there are black people with natural red hair, and if the actor/actress isn't a natural redhead, well, there are dice for that. One is a supermodel turned actress turned gopher for Tony Stark turned actress again. The other is a journalist photographer who happens to be less foul-prone than Lois Lane. Hell, there was one time when Jimmy Olsen was portrayed by a brunette, and absolutely no one complained about that. To be fair, there were far other worse things to complain about Jimmy's portrayal in Batman vs. Superman, including that he was never named in the film itself, and that he was mercilessly killed almost as soon as she was introduced. But if people complain about redhead erasure, I never heard them complain about that one. And Johnny Storm is a hothead. That's it. That is his whole personality. That is his whole thing. He can be a black hothead. He can be a black hothead adopted by the Storms. He can be a black hothead in a full Black Storms family. Or he can be a black hothead in a mixed family. His race doesn't matter. In the same vein, Ariel is a mermaid. I think that she's described as green in the original book. And before Disney made his own animated version, she had been portrayed as every single possible hair color and skin color in the world in other animated films and ballets. Tinkerbell is a fairy, and in the original book, she is described as being too small to hold two emotions at the same time. So who cares what skin color is she? And the Blue Fairy was, of course, blue. The blonde blue-eyed version is Disney exclusive, so they can also decide to change it, and there is no damage done to the original because A, the original wasn't white, B, the original animated movie is still there and is far more damaged by the mere existence of the live action than by the cast of said live actions, and oh my god, see how horrible you have to be to say that being black damages a character anyway. It's not damaging, it's not bad, and it's not forced because people of color exist. And if you have a world in which a kid can be young forever and fly, a puppet can come to life, and mermaids exist, well, then black people should also exist there without breaking your disbelief. Or, as someone once put it, there are dragons in this story, and what you think is unrealistic is a black person existing? And before anyone goes, but why don't they create original characters again? Well, the thing is that when they do, they also get attacked and told that it's forced diversity. Or have we forgot how John Boyega and Kelly Marie Tran were attacked when they appeared in Star Wars? I am actually surprised that Oscar Isaac and Diego Luna didn't get the same treatment, but I guess Hispanic light-skinned actors get a bit of a pass from the usual racist, which is also a very bad thing. Anyway, Tran was bullied out of Twitter by the fans, while there were calls for boycotting The Force Awakens as soon as the trailer revealed that there was one, count it, one black stormtrooper, despite the fact that absolutely nothing in canon suggested that that was impossible. Yes, I know the original stormtroopers were clones. That doesn't mean that the stormtroopers of the First Order were also clones, because the First Order was not the Empire, and in any case, it's a story about a galaxy far, far away, and there is no reason to think that there weren't more black people besides Mace Windu and Lando Calrissian. More importantly, at the end of the day, especially when it comes to either remakes or stories with a franchise like Marvel Heroes, we have to remember that they are different versions of the story, and thus variations are accepted. If we can accept that there is a universe where Tony Stark is a woman and Civil War was fixed by her marrying Steve Rogers, why can't we accept a universe where Mary Jane is not white? If we can see Patrick Stewart as Othello, in an amazing production that made everyone but Othello black to keep the theme of discrimination and not use blackface, why can't we see Denzel Washington as Hamlet? The other versions still exist. The other stage productions still happen. We have like 6 different Batmans now, so why not one that is black if the right actor comes around? A black Bruce Wayne would be quite interesting, as his relationship with Gotham City's powers will have to change a bit, which is when the race matters. And that would make a new story which could be interesting for new audiences while keeping white, traumatized emo Bruce Wayne safe in the comics. All this is to say one simple thing. The reason why diversity can't be forced is because diversity exists in life. Black people exist. Asian people exist. Latin American people exist. And so there is no reason for them not to be present in movies set in the modern day. They also existed before, so with very, very few exceptions in historical events, they also should be present in movies set in the past. And honestly, if we can have Tom Cruise as The Last Samurai, we can have Black, Asian, and Latin American people in events where they weren't, or we think they weren't in the first place. It's a movie, not a documentary. And of course, there is absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be present in movies set in the far future or in fantasy realms. As I keep saying, if dragons, fairies, mermaids, or little green dudes who can manipulate the force are alright with you, but a black person existing along them is what breaks your suspensions of disbelief, then that's a you problem, not a problem of diversity. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessic, and Ellie Riley, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda and the most amazing Amy Song, without whom none of my videos would be possible. I also want to remind you that if you want to support this and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, written link on description because I know my name can be hard to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else, and get the chance to suggest future subjects for videos. You can also support me through Ko-fi, and for each coffee you will get mentioned in 3 future videos. If you can't support me this way, I accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. This was Adalisa Zarate, and I will see you soon so we can grab another cup of coffee and talk about one of the best baseball manga ever, Masanori Morita's Rookies.